what if the safest place for a lesbian in the Middle Ages was also the most religious? The story of women who loved women in the medieval period is a shocking paradox of invisibility and danger, and it begins not in the shadows, but behind the sacred walls of the convent. This video uncovers the truth about a love that history tried to erase, a love that was simultaneously ignored and condemned, a love that found a way to survive in the most unexpected of places. When we think of the Middle Ages, we often picture a world of knights, castles, and strict religious dogma. It's a period that seems, on the surface, hostile to any form of non-normative desire, and yet, the story of lesbian love in this era is far more complex than simple repression. To understand it, we must first grapple with a concept that is alien to our modern minds: the idea of the invisible sex. Medieval society, and particularly its legal and theological systems, was profoundly phallocentric. This means that the prevailing worldview was so focused on the penis as the central agent of sexuality that any act not involving it was often not considered real sex at all. This view was heavily influenced by prominent theologians like Thomas Aquinas, who, in the 13th century, argued that the primary purpose of sexual activity was procreation. In this framework, any sexual act that could not lead to conception was deemed unnatural. While this condemnation applied to many non-procreative acts, the lack of a penis in female same-sex encounters placed them in a uniquely ambiguous category. And this had a strange and contradictory effect on women who loved women. On one hand, their relationships were frequently dismissed as harmless, overly emotional friendships. Because they did not involve a man or a phallus, they were not seen as a threat to the patriarchal line of inheritance or a violation of the sodomitical laws that so aggressively targeted men. This dismissal, this inability to even conceive of female desire as a legitimate sexual force, created a cloak of invisibility that, in a strange way, offered a form of protection. It allowed women to live together, share beds, and form deep, passionate bonds without arousing the same level of suspicion that two men would have. But this protection was a double-edged sword. This same invisibility is the reason why finding records of their lives is so difficult. And it led to a profound historical erasure, a silence in the archives that has taken centuries of careful work to break. These women were not absent from history, they were simply rendered invisible by a society that refused to see them. Paradoxically, one of the most significant spaces where female intimacy could flourish was within the very heart of the patriarchal religious establishment, the convent. In a world where a woman's life was almost entirely defined by her relationship to men, as a daughter, a wife, a mother, the convent offered a radical alternative. It was one of the few places where a woman could escape the demands of marriage and childbirth and live in a community composed entirely of women. Within these walls, free from the male gaze and the direct control of fathers and husbands, women could pursue intellectual, spiritual, and deeply emotional lives. It is no surprise, then, that these all-female spaces became fertile ground for passionate friendships and, undoubtedly, romantic and sexual relationships. We know this not just from speculation, but from the Church's own records. Manuals for confessors, known as penitentials, laid out specific penances for sins. These texts prove that the Church was not only aware of same-sex acts between nuns, but was actively trying to regulate them. For example, some early medieval penitentials prescribed a penance of 3 years for a nun who engaged in sexual acts with another nun, compared to 4 years for a monk who did the same. This distinction is telling. It shows that while the Church condemned these acts, it still viewed them as a lesser sin than male sodomy, more reinforcing the phallocentric idea that female desire was somehow less real or less threatening. Beyond the formal structure of the convent, other communities like the Beguinages also offered women a degree of autonomy. These were lay religious communities, particularly common in the Low Countries, where women lived together in a sisterhood without taking formal, lifelong vows. They supported themselves through their own labor and dedicated their lives to charity and spiritual devotion. Like convents, these spaces provided an environment where deep, supportive, and potentially romantic bonds between women could be formed, away from the direct oversight of the patriarchal family. The Beguines were often viewed with suspicion by the church, precisely because of their independence, and this suspicion sometimes extended to the nature of their relationships. However, the narrative of invisibility and relative safety is dangerously incomplete. While often ignored, love between women could, and did, become a crime. The idea that lesbians face no legal persecution in the Middle Ages is a myth. The first known secular law that explicitly targeted female same-sex acts appeared in a legal collection from Orléans, France, in the year 1270. This text, known as Les Livres de Justice et de Paix, prescribed mutilation for a first offense and death by burning for a third. The law's focus was telling. It condemned women who acted like men or who used instruments to mimic penetrative sex. Again, the phallocentric obsession is clear. The crime was not love or desire between women, but the act of subverting gender roles and daring to mimic the male sexual function. The enforcement of these laws varied dramatically across Europe. In some regions, the laws remained on the books but were rarely acted upon. In others, however, the threat was very real. Historical research, particularly from historian Jonas Rollins, has shown that in the southern Netherlands, between the years 1400 and 1550, at least 25 women were prosecuted for female sodomy. This number is exceptionally high and demonstrates that in certain times and places, women who loved women were actively hunted and punished, sometimes with the ultimate penalty. This shatters the myth of universal lesbian impunity and reveals a far more precarious and dangerous reality. These trials often involved accusations of witchcraft or heresy, more as the authorities struggled to categorize a crime they barely understood. The women accused were often outsiders in their communities, widows, healers, or women who lived independently, making them easy targets for persecution. Amidst this landscape of silence and persecution, a few precious voices managed to break through. The most extraordinary of these belongs to Bietris de Romans, a troubadouress, or female troubadour, from the first half of the 13th century in southern France. In a world where poetry was dominated by men singing of their love for unattainable ladies, Bietris did something revolutionary. She wrote a love song to another woman. Her canso, or song, titled Na Maria Pretz e Fina Valor, Lady Mary, Merit and Fine Worth, uses all the conventions of courtly love poetry, but directs them unambiguously from one woman to another. She speaks of her beloved's fine beauty, her gentle speech, and the joy she inspires. In one line she pleads, "Grant me, lovely lady, if it please you, the gift from which I draw all hope and happiness." For centuries, some scholars, unable or unwilling to accept the possibility of genuine female desire, argued that Bietris must have been a male poet writing under a female pseudonym. However, modern scholarship has largely rejected this claim, cementing Bietris as a rare and authentic queer female voice from the medieval past. Her poem is a testament to the fact that even in a repressive society, love finds a way to be expressed. And she was not entirely alone. Outside of Christian Europe, in the rich literary tradition of the early medieval Arabic world, there are also traces of romance tales and poems that feature female couples, reminding us that the history of Sapphic love is a global one. These stories, often more explicit and accepting than their European counterparts, show that the erasure of lesbian love was not a universal phenomenon, but a specific cultural choice made by the dominant powers in Western Europe. So, what can we conclude from these fragmented and often contradictory pieces of evidence? Lesbian love in the Middle Ages existed in a complex and dangerous paradox. It was a love rendered invisible by a society that could not comprehend sexuality without a man, a blindness that offered a strange and fragile form of protection. It allowed for the existence of intimate female worlds, in convents and private homes, where deep bonds could be forged away from public scrutiny. Yet this love was simultaneously condemned by religious doctrine and in some places criminalized by law, making its expression a perilous act of defiance. The few traces that survive, in the cold text of legal codes, in the anxious warnings of penitentials, and in the beautiful, defiant lines of a single love poem, are proof that these women existed. They loved, they desired, and they resisted a world that tried its best to erase them. What do you think of this hidden history? Are you surprised by the paradox of invisibility and danger? Let us know in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more Sapphic videos.